Welcome to this week's episode of Modern Craftsman Podcast. Today we have John Deans of 475 High Performance Building Supply. We dive into the world of building science, craftsmanship, and the stories behind the companies and products that are shaping the construction industry. John and the business he works for, which is 475 High Performance Building Supply, are at the forefront of sustainable construction and energy efficient building as it relates to information, products, and education. We also explore the importance of air tightness, passive house standards, building the right team for your project, and 475's unique business model, which I like a lot. And the last thing is John's favorite part about living in a renovated loft with 13-foot ceilings.
That's my favorite part of this entire story, and we save it for the end. Stick around. I think this episode in general, like, we haven't went down the building science route in some time, and I think today's episode is going to offer anyone that's struggling with this some clarity and confidence to go into this with, you know, the incremental changes that you need to meet, you need to implement to be a better builder.
Yeah, and some resources to do so. So listen up, enjoy the podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by Andersen Windows. Are you looking to elevate your building skills and stay ahead in the industry? Well, then look no further than Andersen Windows and Doors Pro Views blog. This isn't just any blog, it's a treasure trove for professionals in the building space. Whether you're searching for detailed technical documents or handy tips and tricks, Andersen's blog has got you covered. It's designed to help you become better at your craft with insights from industry experts and practical advice you can apply on the job.
If you're serious about honing your skills, head over to andersenwindows.com/4professionals. Trust us. You don't want to miss out on this valuable resource.
And guys, we are actually going to be with Andersen Windows at the International Builder Show. Myself, I'm going to be at the Remodeling Central Workshop, 3:15 to 3:45 on Tuesday, February 25th. I'll be in the West Hall in room 212. If you guys want to join me there, you can do so. You know where to find that information at the Builder Show website. Make sure you register for that workshop.
I am going to be at the Custom Builder Central Workshop at IBS, presenting with Andersen. We're going to be presenting on some marketing, lead generation, business style course, 3:15 till 3:45 p.m. on February 26th. That's a Wednesday, so don't miss that.
This podcast is also brought to you by Buildertrend. Subs can make or break a job, but as your project grows, keeping them on schedule and aligned can be a challenge. So we've got your solution, Buildertrend.
You may already be familiar with this leading construction management software, but did you know their tools take the chaos out of subcontractor coordination by allowing you to assign tasks, track progress, and keep communication clear all in one place?
It's true, and when you get your subs involved, you can expect fewer delays, less confusion, and better work delivered on time for every project. Make your subs a strength and not a struggle by scheduling a free demo of the tools at buildertrend.com/MC demo. This podcast is also brought to you by Velux. Have you ever wished that you could put just one more window in a living room? Or have you wondered how to add more natural light to a space like a bathroom or even a closet? With Velux skylights, you can enhance any space with natural light, making any room feel bigger, brighter, and better.
And natural light is always enhanced by fresh air. Velux skylights open to let in fresh air from above, and built-in rain sensors close at the first sign of bad weather. The best part about skylights, you can add all the features of a window to your client's home without sacrificing privacy. Visit veluxusa.com/remodeler to find a Velux product that will add natural light to any space in your build.
I'm glad we all called each other to make sure we all wore black today.
You always got to wear. I actually have Nick's shirt on underneath of this one too, but it's freezing in my office right now.
You know, I was
got a haircut.
I just put more light on me so I don't look like a floating head anymore.
How's it going? Good?
Good. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I'm pretty pumped to have you on. To be honest, I have a ton of questions for you. I'm sure
Okay.
Nick does as well. Obviously, looked up who you're working for, a little bit of background on how you got into the industry and started working for 475, but even just a little introduction for listeners as far as like what your background is, some things that you enjoy, just the, normal intro would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's John Deans. I work for 475 High Performance Building Supply, which everybody just calls 475. Um, and I've been here for about a year. And prior to that, for about 6 years, I was building high performance homes in Maine and Rhode Island. I live in Rhode Island now, originally from Maine. And then previous to that, I was at Greenpeace for 9 years, doing environmental activism on various, issues and whatnot. In terms of like things I like to do in daily life, actually, you can see I play lacrosse. I picked that up after about 20 years away from the game. So now I go run around with a bunch of guys in their 40s, trying not to get hit too much. And it's winter time, so snowboarding. So yeah, I like to get outside as much as possible.
You said you're in Rhode Island now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice, but you're from Maine.
Yeah, my wife's from Rhode Island, so I don't know how much you or your listeners know about Rhode Island, but it has a certain gravity to it. People either don't leave, or if they leave, they kind of get sucked back in, and I was attached to one of those people. So
Nice.
that's where we are now.
It happens. So obviously you've always been like environmentally conscientious.
Yeah.
And that's how, did that lead you into what you started doing from like a carpentry perspective, or was it like, how did you go from Greenpeace to carpentry?
Well, it goes way further back. So I'm the son of a shop teacher. And so I grew up, got an older brother, it's two of us, and then our parents. My dad was a shop teacher, amongst other things, but that was his primary occupation. And so we grew up making stuff. We would go, there was a development that went in near the, I lived on a rural road, but it started getting developed as I was a kid in the 80s. And, we would go down to the job sites on the weekends and like grab up all the form nails, bring them home, straighten them. And that's what we had to use to make our forts or whatever it was we were making. So I kind of come by it honest in the sense that I've always made things. And I've always kind of had a hand in it in some way, shape, or form. And then I went to a school in Bar Harbor, Maine called College of the Atlantic, and I got a degree in human ecology, but it was kind of a choose your own adventure school. It was sort of a liberal arts school, if you will. And one of the things that I studied there was green building, which is what we all called it in the early 2000s. And at the time, parallel to that, my best friend from high school, Reggie, owns a building company in Maine called Emerald Builders. And I sort of consulted with him as I was learning things, as he was kind of getting his business off the ground. And so basically the whole time, I was at Greenpeace and in college and whatnot, I was kind of always on the phone with him regularly, talking through business stuff, talking through sustainability material. I would do material research for him, looking at it, different assemblies and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of always had like a little bit of a hand in it. And then I basically got burned out on activism, which was amazing. It was an amazing experience, but I realized that I needed to have like more interaction, more physical movement, and moved back to Maine. And he's like, "Hey, I'll cut you a deal. A quarter of your time, you can be my marketing director, and the rest of the time, I'm going to teach you how to build high performance homes." So that's kind of how I got back into it. So I got to sort of, bump my carpentry skills up, which I'd done carpentry throughout college to pay the bills and whatnot, and had some cool experience doing that, but I'd never really sort of sunk into it. And that's how I ended up here.
The activism, you say Greenpeace, like, talk to me a little bit about what that is. I know I looked it up. It's an independent global campaigning network, right? Founded in Canada. And you go around and you are protesting peacefully, creative confrontation to expose global environmental problems.
Yeah.
I'm reading a definition. What is that? And what was your actual role? Like, what were you doing on a day to day?
Well, I got hired basically about 9 months out of college. And at the time, the position that I was in was basically a community organizer, but particularly on global warming. And so I moved to Elmira, New York, which I didn't know anything about at the time. And I just worked in the local community for about a year. And it literally would be, I would go out on the street and I would flag people down, and anybody who would stop to talk to me, I'd get a conversation going. I'd get their contact information. I'd follow up with them, and we'd have these events. Not so much protest, but more like, open community educational events, like try to get the local mayor to speak at them, that kind of thing. So my background sort of started in like kind of a community organizing kind of place. And then I went to North Carolina, went to Vermont, doing different campaigns in that similar style. And then I lived in DC for 2 years, where I was a registered lobbyist and did policy work and research. So I would work more nationally and internationally, doing sort of research projects, working with coalitions, other environmental organizations, activist groups who are working on various things. I worked on toxic chemicals. I worked on stopping Arctic oil drilling. I worked on shutting down a nuclear plant in Vermont. I worked on climate change.
But when you say you worked on toxic chemicals, what does that mean?
The particular campaigns that I worked on, we were trying to prevent chemical gas disasters. So we got all these plants around the country, right, that store like chlorine gas. We see these train derailments, right, and these big plumes of toxic gas. So what we worked on was putting some research behind, and then lobbying and doing grassroots organizing to push politicians to try to create bills that would lower do harm reduction, basically, where possible, switch to safer alternatives and that kind of thing. And we would sort of highlight that. But we'd also do communications events. Like, I went down to Texas and went to a chemical facility there that I'd done a bunch of research on. We had an airship that kind of looks like a blimp that had like messages on it, and sort of flew that over, got the media to pay attention. So both like raising awareness in the media, but pushing politicians. We would work with local activists, bring them to DC, have them meet with policy people. So it's you sort of hit at all levels. What Greenpeace is known for is what ends up in the press. But and it's the tip of the iceberg, right? There's all of this substantial scientific research, policy research that happens. We write draft papers for policy, meet with lawmakers, strategize across coalitions. I would do things like I went to the North Slope of Alaska when I was working on Arctic oil drilling, and I met with indigenous communities up there. And to be frank, got yelled at a lot. But it was part of the sort of thing where it's like, we're going to reach out and we'll take the hit. That's fine. There's been issues with white-led environmental organizations. We're going to go up there. We're going to be vulnerable. We're going to talk to communities about, their local environment and some of the impacts. So work on it's a huge umbrella term. It was kind of like, we would look at an issue. It's not too dissimilar from building a house. You look at an issue and then you problem solve it, and you figure out what are the levers that we can push here that might actually make some change. So
I was thinking to myself how terrible I'd be at a job where I'd have to flag people down and then get their contact information and try and pitch them. It's probably, if not up there at the top, it's pretty close to the top as far as being my nightmare.
Yeah. I tend to be a bit more extroverted, but even for me, it was a stretch. When they told me that's what I was going to be doing, I was like, I'm sorry, what?
Like, I feel awkward driving by those people, ignoring them, where I'm like, I don't know what to do right now. What do I look at? And start panicking internally.
Yeah. But what I will say is, I think what drove me to continue to do it was realizing the value it had, because like community organizing, I don't think is very well understood. Essentially what you're doing is trying to cast a net and find the people who already want to do something and get them together. That's really what it is, because like individual action only goes so far. Collective action's far more powerful. So, I would meet people on the street who they were hungry for something, but nobody had asked them. Right. I think that's the thing that we forget a lot of times. We just sort of expect people to, do things of their own volition, when sometimes people just need to be asked, and then they're all about it. And I think one of the most powerful things that happened for me is, I spent about a year in this community in Elmira, and by the end of it, like I had to move on to another place, and they sort of threw me a going away party. And I had several people come up to me and be like, we didn't know we could do this.
Yeah.
Like, this was an amazing experience. And like, one of the people I worked with has gone on to be on city council. So it just sort of takes like a little bit of an invitation sometime, and then you sort of learn together.
So what was the reason for leaving? I mean, broad picture, I can imagine the frustrations and probably not feeling like there's massive amounts of progress. You can take like the little wins. But why, what was the real reason for like stepping away from that and getting back into, carpentry, what you were doing in Maine and working for a buddy of yours?
Yeah. There was a little bit of it that was just sort of situational football, but like, I think the personal driver for it for me was I ended up spending all day sitting in a chair, staring at a computer, and spending a lot of time by myself. Like, things like research and stuff just take a lot of time, and I would feel isolated. And like I said, I'm a little more extroverted, so I like feeding off of the energy of other people. So that was a big thing that sort of led to a lot of burnout. Like, people would, and sort of to layer on top of that, like, I have a very late in life diagnosis for ADHD, which, had I known 20 years ago that I had that and sort of learned some tools with it, I think I probably would have had a different path in a lot of ways. But I think I was feeling it without really knowing it at the time, and realizing like, I need to move around, I need to use my hands, I need to talk to people, that kind of thing. So in some ways it was sort of doing something completely opposite and just sinking into the craft and that experience of tangibility that you get with it. And now this job is sort of a combination of the two.
I want to get back to that, but in like a little bit of a tangent, the late life diagnosis of ADHD, where is there like a lot from your upbringing and education and life that you can look back on and be like, wow, had I known?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Big
And
time.
so I can relate a lot to that, but more so with anxiety and just general mental health, and that life was very chaotic and we never addressed it.
Yeah.
Why do you think it never? Because I don't feel like we're that. You're probably I'm almost 40, so we're probably similar age range. That like it was getting diagnosed and people were treating it at that point. Like, what led to it just not being diagnosed or really addressing it?
I mean, I think it's a combination, like probably just for most people, where there's the cultural aspects. I grew up in rural Maine, so everything came to us late. So any trend that might have been happening in mental health was sort of coming to us late. I had friends who, or I knew kids in school who were like on ADHD medication, but to be frank, it was a form of ADHD, because let's remember that's a spectrum, right? That plays out in a bunch of different ways. And that was for the kids who had so much energy built up that they could not sit still and would cause a lot of problems and be really sort of out in front of the class and doing things or breaking rules or whatever. And I was never that kind of person. I had a lot of energy and I was really outspoken, but I sort of knew how to play the game, I think. And I think from that, it developed a bunch of coping mechanisms. And I think a lot of it too was like, I just was okay at the time with the failures it presented, because I knew I could compensate for it. Like, I graduated like dead middle of my class, like smack dab in the middle. I can't remember even what the numbers were, but I just remember thinking, oh, I'm completely, in the middle. And I was okay with it, because I'm like, I know the reason I'm here. Like, I'm smart enough. I can pass most of the tests. I can participate in class, but no way in hell am I doing my homework. And if I do it, it's not happening on time, you know? And I knew that I could get into the college that I wanted to go to, which I did, and I could pursue what I wanted to pursue there. So it was sort of about getting through, and then, you just mask and cope and create all these strategies, not realizing, I think, in the moment that you're leaving behind this sort of wake of like death by 1,000 cuts trauma. Like, there's all these little things that are piling up that you don't realize until it sort of burns you out.
Yeah, I have like a similar experience, and when I finally, I say, came to, but it's you have this clarity where it's like, wow, this makes a ton of sense, and it's almost like I can equate it to shaking my head, and then all of a sudden being able to like see straight and come out of what I was living in, and being like, wow, that was very chaotic, and I have so much more clarity for what needs to happen now. I think that probably it sounds like what you experienced also. It's like it wasn't that bad, like that it affected me on such a great scale that people wanted to help me.
Right.
Where it was like it was just bad enough that I could still get by. I think I would have been better off had it been worse, and people been like, "Wow, you really need to like get some help or get on medication." I think between not being that bad, like having a decent upbringing and being smart enough to understand how to play the game to get by, I think that probably prolonged what I was experiencing for a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that sounds pretty parallel.
Um, so obviously, like you had a lot of aspirations to have an impact on people in the world with based on what you were doing for work, and it seems like your personality and everything else. How does so you then became a carpenter? You were back up in Maine. Obviously, you're in Rhode Island now, and you're working for 475. Like, do you feel that that's presenting an opportunity for you to serve whatever you feel the need to do in life right now? Like, is it giving you the platform to really serve those needs?
Yeah, I think in a big way. I mean, it's sort of a perfect fit in a lot of ways, at least for where I'm at right now, where it's sort of I can take all this knowledge that I've gained in this industry, which I mean, you guys have talked about this ad nauseum with different guests about just total gap in education and information on a lot of these practices, and I can take that and I can deliver it to people directly. And so I'm in a role where on a day-to-day basis, most of what I'm doing is helping people. I mean, there's technically for 475, I'm on what would be called a sales team, but my title is product consultant. And really it's that consultant side that is most of the time that I spend. And it's working with people. And I feel like I'm at the forefront of a movement in that sense, but it's also still very tangible and practical, and I can have my hands in it. And I can, interface with a whole bunch of different people every day, every week, every month, every year, which is like the other thing that I need to do. Whereas when I was doing the carpentry, it was super satisfying. I mean, there's just nothing like having nothing in a space and then something there when you leave that day, right? Like that's the drug for building. But it was one house at a time.
Yeah.
And for me, my head is up at the 30,000 foot level all the time, just thinking about the greater sort of movement and sort of structure of things. And this was a great marriage of kind of both of those things. And so I still get to, I get to go into job sites, I get to work with people, I get to do trainings, I get to use some of the materials in that way. I'm going to be like a trainer for the studio for high performance design and construction coming up in a few weeks. So I'm actually going to get to work with new carpenters who are trying to learn these skills. So it puts me in front of people in a way that I feel like it really fulfills that mission oriented side. And 475 being a mission oriented company, we're here, we sell a lot of tape, but we're here to make the industry better.
Yeah.
Our vehicle happens to be sort of product sales and then the education that goes with it. But the whole mission is to drive the industry to be better.
I was unfamiliar with the company before looking into you, and it's such an interesting model. And correct me if I'm wrong, but at the heart, you are like an e-commerce material supply company for high performance building.
Yeah.
But then it appears as if you have these consultants within different networks throughout the country that could basically help builders, contractors, architects, engineers, whatever, design systems to be able to create like a product that is not only sustainable, but doesn't compromise something else within the building. Like, you're all very well versed technologically to understand the building science aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly couldn't have said it better myself. That's the thing.
It's such an interesting model. Like, hearing it makes perfect sense, and I'm like, why isn't every company like this?
I think part of the reason, Tyler, is that now you have these mega stores that are just like at one point it was these smaller stores that would focus on a niche of products, and now we have the box stores that have everything. And then it becomes, then that becomes a marketing game, as who has more marketing dollars to get more product in front of you, where it's like, like these guys, like, I never really explained it the way that you did, Tyler, but that is a good way. And I would agree, John, like it's just a platform for really high quality, building science, focused product. And frankly, it's just super niche. And something you said, John, like I was going to question is, you were saying how it's kind of product first and education second. I almost think, I mean, at least in my opinion, I can't imagine someone's coming to you for product first without prior education.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're hand in hand. I don't think it's necessarily the first and second thing. I think it's, the summary that I always give is that we're a knowledge resource company that sells tape.
Yeah.
That's, and when you go on our website too, I mean, even our website is designed differently than a lot of other businesses. I mean, it's built on a Shopify platform, but we have sort of stretched that to, its fullest extent of being able to provide a whole bunch of educational resources. Like our blogs aren't designed for like search engine optimization. They're designed for like educational purpose, to really like present case studies or different assemblies or different practices and things like that. And we have a whole series of architecturally drawn assembly details for different assemblies called the Smart Enclosure series,
And that's a super interesting point. The fact that it's not search engine optimization focused, because you talk to anyone that's going to help you market your business and your company. They talk about blogs and how and a lot of them, I'll even say myself included, like the blogs are completely there to create SEO traction.
Right.
And, like we're going through this process right now where we're re-strategizing our SEO, and they're sending me the blogs. I'm like, it feels pretty bland. And they're like, yeah, but it captures what it needs. And I'm like, yeah, I don't love this. And it's like, now I'm just playing this game of like ranking, which I'm like, whatever, I'm buckled in. Let me get to first place, and then I guess I'll modify my strategy. But the fact that like that just goes to really support what you say, and the fact that you're education first, or not first, but like you're an education platform. You're making that a priority and making sure that there is extreme value there.
Yeah, I think in some of it's just the old school belief that quality matters and that quality will attract what you need, as a business. And it's a bit of a slower burn in some respects, but I mean, we're now known for anybody who's like approaching high performance building, like we're known as a place to go get information. And like, people will grab our information. They might be using who knows what products, but they're taking the information from us, and that's a win, right? Like we see that as part of like our job in the industry. So
do you have is a portion of the business revenue from helping design or coordinate with people, more so than just the products themselves?
So we don't get direct compensation for anything like that, but that is, in some ways that is our sales and marketing strategy. But I would say it's a strategy sort of after the fact. Like you can call it that looking back, but really like my job is to help people make their projects the best they can be, the best help I can give. And people come back to us because we are helpful, right? Like I've in Massachusetts right now, the code changes have sort of exploded the amount of high performance building that's happening, which means a bunch of contractors who have never sort of built that way don't know what these products are, don't know the assemblies, don't know the sequencing. There's layers that they've just never, encountered before. And so they come to me and they're either like skeptical, frustrated, just ignorant, wanting to learn, confused, whatever it is. And by the time, we've had some conversations and some back and forth, and I've done some training and education, they're like, okay, this is approachable. This is fine. Like I can do this now. And I've had some of them just tell me like, I'm going to send all my architects to you because you helped us so much that I can trust that if they work with you, then by the time it gets to me, it's going to be what I need, to implement.
Well,
So
I would say that like
it's the model.
one of the biggest hurdles or the like highest barrier to entry for people looking to adopt a lot of this stuff is just understanding the new products and how they work. And a lot of them are not necessarily like, you're not going to Home Depot and getting them. So if you want to implement this, how are we going to coordinate between client, contractor, design? And that's exactly what you guys are doing, almost as a consulting service, but from the standpoint of selling product, which like big picture creates sustainability, longevity with a business. Um, I mean, it's the way that things should be. You think about it with any sort of product within our industry, to be able to go to whoever's selling them and actually have them understand what you need to do to get it right and not be like, oh, that's going to be on your architect. That's going to depend on this or that. To be able to go somewhere and have somebody who works with your team to detail this stuff properly is actually like, it's so, it just makes sense. And like, it seems so reasonable and logical, but nobody does it like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of businesses out there evolve from some situation that somebody was in and then it grew from there, right? Like every business starts as like a little seed, that grows into something. And so wherever you started is kind of like where your evolution comes from. For us, our founders were trying to design and do these brownstone retrofits in Brooklyn. And one of the key elements to doing that, like at a passive house level or high performance level, good building science with moisture management, was a smart vapor retarder. And like the one that we sell is Intello Plus. And it essentially is going to allow moisture. It's going to prevent most of the moisture from pushing into the wall in the first place through diffusion, but it will allow drying, right? It'll open up, and that vapor variability makes it smart. And they were just frustrated that there wasn't really a great supply of those materials in the US. So they started bringing it over, and we sort of grew from there. So it sort of grew out of this sort of lack of availability. And then along with that, there were evangelists for passive house construction and design. And so it's just sort of naturally I think, came that way. And it was sort of a no brainer because that's where, it was rooted in that sort of frustration of the lack of information and materials. So that's what we do. We try to provide that for the industry now.
Do you think that code changes are going to be the driver behind a lot of what people are doing, like with your business? Is it more so people just looking to build more efficiently, or is it code changes that are driving sales?
I mean, I think it's a little column A, column B. I mean, I think the reason we're here now and the code is changing is because there were market forces, right? There was a desire from customers, builders, architects, whoever, to sort of do better and better and better, right? And so that ends up influencing those code conversations. It ends up influencing, a deeper look at the building science, doing the forensics that then leads to that information. And I think simultaneously there are political forces trying to, reduce energy use, reduce carbon, all of that kind of stuff. So it's sort of there are those impacts. And then I think moving forward, those code changes just help amplify what's sort of happening anyway. And it's a messy process, right?
Yeah.
Like it's going to be steps forward and back as we go. But I would say overall the trajectory is really positive. And people are real. So much of this is about demystifying because, like, having built only high performance homes mostly before, like, I don't necessarily know any different, but it's not like a massive step to take, in and of itself, right? It's just a piece of tape here, some sealant there, staging your sequencing a little bit differently, and then you've got it, right? But I think people don't know that necessarily, and they're sort of intimidated by it or think like, oh, it's unnecessary, or I don't want to do it. I don't want to change my ways. I don't want, So the education is really critical in that piece.
Go ahead, Nick.
Well, I was going to say, I also think that a lot of people take this approach where they just swing too hard to thinking that they're fixing something by over insulating a wall or over air sealing a detail. Like, I think about brownstones a lot. Like, we're obviously in Boston and we do a lot of brownstone renovations. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, but it's like the amount of projects I walk and I see them, they foam the entire backside of the brick wall. It's like, man, like that's going to be an issue. And it's not a matter of like, it's not really if, it's when. And,
Yeah.
and you see these buildings and it's like, you know, I'm also watching buildings get built around me. Like I live, my neighborhood is, there's not a lot of architectural control and certainly not a lot of building science oversight. And, um, and I'm watching these buildings be built. And I mean, it's literally 36 months after they finish the project, they're ripping facades off these buildings. And I
It's
mean,
tough.
and I don't
It's
even
tough to
mean like in
watch.
a small, like it's terrible. Like we
Yeah.
watch, you know, anyone that listens to this podcast regularly hears me talk about this all the time, but it's like my wife and I have a bet going every time there's a new building. She's like, how long? And I tell her, I'm like, within 6 months. And then whoever sees it first, but whoever, like, there'll be a boom lift being dropped off outside of a building and her or I will text it, be like, hey, there it is. The boom lift's here.
Yeah.
And we watched a project. It was 36 months old, and they ripped all the brick off, like full depth brick off the entire building, and replaced the sheathing from the
Yeah.
outside. I mean, hundreds of units, people live there, and it's just,
It's brutal.
and it's like, I mean, there's so many issues with this,
Yeah.
but the bigger issue is like people think that, okay, whatever, like instead of figuring out and understanding what I'm supposed to do, I'll just over insulate it with foam.
Right.
And it's
Right.
like you're actually creating a massive issue here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of unintended consequences, and it's driven by like a couple podcasts ago. Like, I'm sorry, I can't remember the person's name, but they're doing like the Nantucket
BJ,
retrofit. Yeah. And you kind of you had a bit of this conversation. I was thinking during it, I was like, the cost to build a given home is pretty much the same no matter who does it. It's really about who's paying the different line items, right? Like you can pay for it up front and have that upfront cost, or you can
Sure.
pay for it through change orders, or you can pay for it through a reduction in the quality of the structure itself, right?
Which means you're typically paying for it in the maintenance.
Right. Yeah. Or somebody else's. You're
Like,
kicking it to
for-
somebody else and they're paying for it.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to build it cheap now because the person you're going to sell it to, they're going to foot the bill. So it's, do you want to pay for it or do you want to pay for it? Right. The costs are all relatively in the same bubble. They're just allocated differently over time and, people and quality.
Imagine if you could like put that into a graphic.
Like, I think of a pie chart.
Here's your house. Here's your house. Your house is $500,000.
I think graphics are great for podcasts, are they?
Is everyone watching
it?
If you're only listening to this, you got to join us on
You got to go to YouTube.
You can see my little hand model.
That's right.
But it's like, it like take the $500,000. Everyone gets to basically build the same house. It's like this guy's going to make sure it's built the best. This guy's going to make sure he makes the most profit. Whatever, like however you shake it out. But like to your point, it's like we're paying the same for material and generally for the labor. And then it's, how you manage it, which is directly related to your skill set of your trades and your skill set of management. And if one of those lacks, like then there's typically a reduction in quality. And then it's like, okay, well, hey, I built that house and it was only $300 and that guy's charging you $500, but the $300,000 one ends up costing another $200 over the course of 3 years.
Which means they cost the same eventually.
Right. And it's like to be able to communicate that would be, I mean, just that, like, it's super interesting to think of that.
So when I worked for the company in Maine, Emerald Builders, as the marketing person, part of my job was just sort of general communications. I would interface with architects and customers, and we would have this conversation. Mm-hmm. And especially when it came to estimates, people want to know, like, what's it going to cost? Everybody's got their estimating system or whatever, but some are built on the idea of like, we're going to go as bare bones as we can just based on what's in the drawings. Even if we know there are going to be these other costs down the road, we're not going to talk about them. Whereas we would go into those meetings and we'd say, yeah, it's going to be all of this because we can already foresee that there are going to be these cost impacts down the road. So we're including those in the estimate today because our job is to serve you and give you the best picture possible. And we'd lose jobs. And then we'd hear about the jobs a year or two down the road, and they ended up costing what we said they were going to cost, right? But the person was, a couple $100,000 less at the estimating level. And to the people who could understand it, we would get the job because they'd be like, I appreciate the honesty, the upfrontness. We'd spell it all out. We weren't high, when I was a kid, for some reason, I don't know why we ate liver, but we ate liver. And I would always hide it in the mashed potatoes in order to, so it's like, we wouldn't hide the liver in the mashed potatoes. You know what I mean? Like, we would just be out front with it. And I think if everybody starts doing more and more of that, we can shift the culture in the industry. But you've got a lot of people who are just scared to do it because they feel like, well, they can't afford to lose a job. They can't afford to lose, a customer base or momentum with their company, whatever it happens to be. It feels like a risk. And I think to me, it's about being honest and forthright, and then letting chips fall where they may.
I think a lot of that comes down to just like, obviously, competitive nature of our industry and what people are doing to be able to sustain. You had mentioned about, it to be high performance or to build a more efficient home, it might just be adding some tape in an area here or there. And I think that maybe it was Ben Bogey we had on, but he basically told us, like, it doesn't have to be as expensive as people anticipate it being. Are there other misconceptions that you feel people have about the building practices and high performance and building efficiently?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think the biggest misconceptions start with just not wanting to do something new. That's usually where people come to me at. And it's, like I said, it's either frustration or confusion or just knowing that they have something to learn. But I think there are things like sequencing. Like, that's one of the things we talk about all the time. And I've seen it in full effect where, if you want to build an airtight envelope, for instance, and you're using, the Intello Plus interior airtight and, smart vapor control membrane that we sell, for instance, or there's other ones out there. But, it's the simple thing of putting a strip of that on the exterior wall before you butt an interior wall into it so that you can come back onto it later.
Yeah.
Right. But I went and consulted on a project where they didn't do that. They were just framing because framers got a frame. Right. And so they were just slapping the walls up. And then they came to that, stage of the project where they're running that membrane in there. And we had to troubleshoot how to get it around these interior walls. And it was so much extra work. So someone could walk away from that experience and think like, oh my God, it's so much more to air seal and to do all this work. When it's like, no, it's actually just, it's that forethought and planning. In fact, I think the conversations you guys had with Ben was a lot about that. Like, it's just about looking ahead a few steps, instead of just looking, directly in front of you. And I think that's one of the things that's like, we're a very passive house based company. And one of the things I really love about the passive house process is that it forces your hand from the beginning to play out a lot more scenarios than maybe a lot of other projects do, because you have to analyze them. You can't analyze them without having thought through certain details. So by the time those plans end up on a job site and construction begins, there's a lot of planning that's already been done by the team. A lot of those plans are on paper, but also just in the heads of the people who are going to be running the project. And you create efficiencies that way. So you might be adding something here, but your increase in efficiency compensates for it over here. And I think that's what a lot of people don't necessarily think about. They might just say, oh, I had a tough experience the first time I tried to do this. I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if you deconstruct that a little bit, could you have gotten ahead of it? And so on the next one, perfect example, this morning I went down to South County Habitat for Humanity project here in Southern Rhode Island. Awesome project, 7 buildings, they're probably about like 1,400 square foot homes. They're all net zero. And they talked about how as they, went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, they just learned along the way. And I mean, obviously they're working with a volunteer base of people, and there's probably a lot of relearning that happens on each house, but they just sort of, the managers sort of realize, okay, if we do this, then, it's going to be a lot faster and easier. We're going to be able to teach people to do this. And they said sort of, as they got to the end, they've now developed a sort of new model of building that they'll take into future projects just by kind of going through that process. So I think there's a lot that can be learned there. And what I try to do is be the shortcut, right? I've been down those roads. Like they had issues where they had taped on the windows and had not accounted for where the trim was going to hit. So then they had to peel off this tape that we sell that's super sticky, and it was a pain. And I was like, I've been down that road because I've done that too. And here's how we dealt with it. And now they're set up to do a better job on the next one. So,
I think that so many, like a lot of people are hesitant to adopt any of these building techniques because of the fear of the unknown or using these products together. And I think that that's been exacerbated with the way that we're building and how much different it is now, and especially from how we used to build. And I think that like making a mistake on a house that leaks or is leaky, the consequences are way less.
Yeah.
And so like that's what I fear most, not for myself, because I understand I'm going to do the best to educate myself, but like the people who aren't getting it right, building homes at a fairly low level where it's detailing and sequencing that logically makes sense, and they're not getting it right. And I fear for like, as we move forward and people are looking to execute these details and the sequencing, it may become a little bit more complex. That's where I fear a lot of the issues arise, especially because like now everything's trapped. And I'm not sure like how to bridge. Obviously what you're doing is helping that. But when we get to doing this on a greater scale, like how we avoid that when I see it day in and day out, that it's already being done wrong with very simple details.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are some bigger issues at play with some of that. Like, I think, obviously everybody's talking about the labor shortage we have, and certainly, highly skilled labor, doing this type of work in general, right? We just don't have the same population, coming in at a younger age. But like, for instance, again, just to use the habitat example, a lot of the reason those buildings ended up being net zero, they weren't originally going to be, is because there was a technical school that got involved in the project. And that's what the students wanted. They're like, look, this is the future. Like, we need to learn this stuff. So if we're going to work on this, like, we want to be working towards net zero because we know that's where it's going. And that excites me a lot, because it says, okay, there's some thinking in the younger generations, and they're in a technical school and they're learning this stuff. And I think we have to, I hope that we can see an evolution in the culture around construction and carpentry. Actually, Nick, I loved your video. I think it was from Switzerland, where you went to the school.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm blown away by that, just the amount of seriousness that is given to the educational process and the respect for the profession, that it is a profession. You know what I mean? Like, let's be frank, it's stigmatized, right?
Totally.
It's seen as like this fallback plan, or like, if you can't, do anything else and go work in construction. And it's like, no, we should be embracing this as like, this is super exciting. It's super interesting. It's fun every day. And, it's something that the rest of society should also embrace as a respected thing. So I think there's some cultural stuff that's just, it's a long time to get there. Yeah. But I also think that like podcasts like this, others, a lot of the social media that's happening is helping to move the needle on that and make it more legitimate. And I think, that's just a longer road.
Hey guys, real quick pause from the podcast. Just a reminder, head over to moderncraftsman.co and sign up for our newsletter. We send out a weekly newsletter with a bunch of information on this week's episode, as well as some free goodies. And of course, everything that we've been promoting. We've been doing this podcast for 8 years now, and have had some amazing conversations, but it's time for us to get tactical and give you guys real world resources. And Tyler and I are committed to doing that in a really big way. So make sure you sign up for the email. We'll show you everything that we've been working on behind the scenes if you do that. Well, I mean, it's it's like we have the issue why I think there's such a stigma around it and that it's always a fallback plan is because we also have the issue of construction not getting better, not attributing to what we're talking about today, like in getting into the finer workings of construction and better products, not even products, just better detailing, like better understanding of how to build. You're building the same crap that I was talking about 10 minutes ago. So then like the trade pool doesn't need to be super experienced because, well, the bar was set so low anyway, it's going to fail. Like let it fail. Where, if you were to reapproach that, like there's so many issues with it. It's more expensive. And I want to be careful in saying that because it's more expensive in the sense of you're doing it right. Not like not the basic, like basically just a passing grade. Like it's not more expensive than getting a passing grade. It's more expensive than failing. And a lot of these buildings are just completely failing. And then you have layered onto that is that so many of these projects are being built at a failure level that you're pulling down the fictitious cost of construction. So it's like, well, why are you so much more expensive? It's like, I'm not. Like
I'm just realistic.
You were talking about building something that will fail. Like you're asking, that person might tell you that it might not fail, but it's going to fail. Like they don't have the actual detailing and resources to make that a viable product. And we're flooding the market with that. So it's skewing everything.
Yeah.
But then then sure, you do need to make it a respected trade, and the trade is filled with unskilled labor that doesn't demand as high of a price point. So now you're talking about like, okay, well, it's more expensive to have higher skilled trades, and you need higher skilled trades to make these more detailed buildings. And it's like, I think we're in this like whirlwind of nothing is like coming to, nothing is settling. Like we're just battling back and forth of like, just build it fast and cheap. And no, we really want to do it, the right way, but it's hard because it's hard to sell because it's more expensive, and it's more expensive because we need more expensive people, et cetera, et cetera. You said something a couple minutes ago that I wanted to come back to. I'll remember in a minute.
What do you think as far as like, if somebody wants to stay ahead of the curve, right? You're a builder that's building right now, like today's standard of homes, and you want to start implementing some of the like more low hanging fruit into your business. What do you think are some options for somebody, even if a client's building a home, like what are some upgrades do you feel just don't add so much to the bottom line where it's like, yeah, you have to do this?
Yeah. It's interesting because I honestly have a terrible sense of what the baseline is.
Yeah.
So there's
all right. Well, how about if you were building a house, what do you think that you would integrate into that house?
Mm-hmm.
Like what makes a good house for you?
I think, aside from just general quality construction, things being put together well, air sealing is at the top of my list, because air sealing coupled with proper ventilation. Let's just always say those things together for a while until people understand that is the case, right? Because you can't build a super airtight building and not ventilate it properly. It's about air control, right? I think that's one of the things that we talk about air tightness, but it's actually about air control, which is a more systemic approach, right? We're blocking the air from coming through the walls because buildings aren't frogs. They're not meant to breathe through their skin. And we're giving the house a set of lungs to breathe with, and we're controlling where the air comes in and how the air circulates and how it leaves, right? So I think that dynamic is absolutely top shelf. Like I'd rather have, I want really good air control. I want good thermal control, good vapor control, good water control. But, water control is a given. Bulk water, like flashing, has to be done right. And actually, speaking of Ben Bogie, I was talking with him the other day, and he was talking about how like there's actually a pretty big gap in people flashing properly.
Yeah.
And that alone is concerning. So I would say at the very least,
like the most, and that when we talk tapes and sequencing, like
Hmm.
the flashing sequencing is what
Right.
I feel is most lacking with people, and what scares me the most as we progress into like, yeah, we really need to make sure that the water stays on the outside of this house and that
Right.
it has a place to get out. Like, to
Yeah.
me, that's what's scary.
Yep. Yeah. I think if that is on the table, then that is the first priority. Like that has to be good. I don't care what kind of house you're building. You can build a leaky house. You still got to flash it properly,
Yeah.
because no amount of like, passive ventilation through the walls is going to account for bulk water damage. I mean,
Yep.
I'm sure we've all like repaired rotted windows, right? Like I walk into
Mhm.
buildings all the time. I see a little bit of bubbling paint on the window trim and I'm like,
Yeah.
that wall's rotted around that window, right? Like, and you just see it everywhere. It
Mhm.
just jumps out at you. And those are leaky buildings, right? So clearly, leaky isn't going to save you there. So the flashing has to be good. And I think the next step is airtightness. And, I think product can help here. I mean, certainly, like the products that we sell are really designed to make this as conducive as possible. They're airtight, they're rugged, they're robust. But you see a lot of, we've got the tape sheathing systems now for barriers, and that kind of allows people like to get into it a little bit more. I think we've seen an increase in airtightness just from those systems. But it's also things like, are you taping your sheathing, at the sill? Is that getting connected to the foundation, and are you blocking that? Because I think a lot of people don't realize that the air leakage at the sill is, if you have little 1/8 inch gaps the entire perimeter of your building,
Mhm.
imagine if those were gathered into a circle. That's a pretty big hole,
Yeah.
right? And that's like a pretty easy step that someone can take. It's one more added step, if you're not doing it already, to just run that tape around that perimeter. It's probably a couple hours, for a modest size house.
Mhm.
And, I think it's things like that. So I try to take people through those types of steps. And then it's like, okay, is your subslab vapor barrier connected to your foundation or to the rest of your air barrier? That's another, and this is what I sort of mean by a little bit of tape. That's just another round of tape to make that connection. And now you don't have, I mean, people don't realize, I think, things like when you put pressures on a house and you get the stack effect where it turns the whole house effectively into a kind of chimney, it's going to suck air through the foundation, right? If it's got cracks, it will use them. So any place you can block those off, you've got huge gains. And those are some of the common areas I see. And then beyond that, it's, if you're doing, a flange mounted window and you're leaving the bottom open, well, that means that that's an air gap. So what does that mean? You got to make sure it's well air sealed on the inside. I think tape's the best way to do that personally, but folks are caulking or whatever they're doing to make that seal happen. It's about sort of tracking where that air barrier goes. So I
Yeah.
think all those little steps can add up to a lot, and skipping them can have disastrous effects.
Yeah, they also like the tighter that you build something, the more forces there's going to be when you do have these gaps, right? Where it's like,
Right.
you have a 100-year-old house that's leaking everywhere. You have a new house and you miss a detail, and it's like, yeah, that's going to be pulling
Yeah.
through that area a lot.
I think what the one other thing that I'll add is on the process side, which is the blower door.
Mhm.
So if folks don't know what a blower door is, please go look it up, get used to it. It's going to be required everywhere eventually. But right now, I think the blower door is seen as a final exam. It's like the SAT of building the house. And we really encourage people to treat it as a diagnostic tool in the process. So before you put your drywall on, test your envelope, because that's the time to find those air leaks,
Yeah.
not later, right? And so I think doing the blower door and also going around either with a smoke pen or infrared gun or something like that, it can sound like a lot, but in the total cost of a project, those are pretty minimal expenses for a massive gain. Like when we're talking about like, well, what happens if you suddenly have to tear a wall apart because you missed a leak, right? And that's
Mhm.
keeping you from a CO and an air tightness code restriction. So I mean, I think it's things like that. I think it's looking at some of the most vulnerable areas and trying to hit those. And then from there, it's things like increasing insulation. It's better and better building science from there. I mean, the ventilation thing is a key piece. If you're going to build airtight, you got to ventilate right. All that kind of stuff. But Like these habitat houses that I toured today, they are just basic, decent level
Yeah.
houses, and they're net zero. I mean, one of them had 4 solar panels on the roof, and it's like 1,400 square feet, net zero. Like they're only paying the connection fee,
Yeah. That's
right? I
cool.
mean, it's possible. So like, I think the big thing that I work with folks on is like, don't start with the like, I can't do it, right?
Hmm.
Let's start with the question of how do we do it, and then let's go from there. And then we might have to make some compromise. I mean, I do that all the time. I'm always pushing the sort of gold standard or platinum standard of all this, and then we sort of dial it back depending on what the project scope is,
I
right? You're
mean,
not necessarily
we
going to be able
have
to do
to,
everything.
like, in order to be able to co-decide, for most people, in order to be able to integrate any of this, like, it can't always just be the gold standard, right? Like,
Right.
we have
Right.
to have options to get into this for people to get their feet wet. And like, I think a lot of times, not an issue that I have with it, but like a lot of times I feel that so many people, when building high performance, get like so far into the weeds that they're missing the big picture. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, from an efficiency perspective, if you're going to spend how much money and how much time and how many resources to get this, like, on the back end, what's that doing for us? Or are you going to, like, is it at the point of no return where you're just throwing money at something that just doesn't make sense? And like, health and comfort aside, I think that we have to do a decent job of finding that equilibrium point that, yeah, it makes sense to invest, and we're making it up on the back end, and like we're able to use um HVAC systems and windows that, like, yeah, they all work together, and we're getting a really well built house, but it doesn't have to be like the absolute cream of the crop, passive house certified. Like, that's what interests me, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that until code changes, and until, if politics push that, whatever it may be, I think that for most people's perspective, getting somebody into a comfortable house that's healthy, and up to date, I think that's really important. I think that we're going to make the
Mm-hmm.
biggest impact, from an environmental sustainability there. It's not, like, if we could hit a bulk number of houses and households throughout the country, rather than this really small, with like marginal improvements, rather than this really, really small, um, like, tiny little pocket of people who are building these homes that run on nothing. I think that, like, from an environmental sustainability standpoint, it's going to be a much greater impact.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, it's the tip of the spear theory. I think you always got to have the people that are pushing the envelope and doing this sort of like ultimate thing to create a wake behind that for some best practices that people
Yeah.
can adapt. And like, I think, if every builder out there and architect or whoever in the industry just tried to do one improvement, one thing on the next project, it starts to snowball. And I've watched that happen over the years. I mean, I don't know. It was around COVID, when like the BS and beer online thing sort of took off, and I was on one of those, and we were talking about this sort of incremental approach. And I've now watched some of the builders on there who were either skeptical or sort of cautious, now have much improved, assemblies, whatever, 5 years later, because I think they just sort of took one step at a time and said, okay, on the next one we're going to try this. On the next one we're going to try this. So I think stagnation is the biggest enemy. I think constant advancement is the thing, and you can't necessarily make massive jumps. Some can, some can't, but I think making those incremental steps, but just constantly doing it. It's like, I hate going to the gym, right? I hate doing it. I have to now because I'm not outside working anymore, right? So I'm watching all the people on Instagram doing all the different coaches, different perspectives on that. But the one thing that seems consistent across the whole board is just get in there,
Yeah.
right? Like, don't sort of set yourself up for failure by saying like, I'm going to do this many reps and this much stuff. Like, just go to the place, jump on a machine, pick up some weights, just start the process, and
Right.
then it'll snowball. I see it as the same way. but we got to do it as like a collective industry.
Yeah, I saw you running on your Instagram saying it was like a 4 out of 10 for you. 4 things you like, the 6 things you dislike.
Yeah. It's not my favorite thing. I need to chase a ball around.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That like I got to play lacrosse or basketball or something like that to do it. But
I do, John. I think that's probably the best piece of advice, like for people listening. You know, what you guys just outlined is that you just have to do something, do one thing, and let it compound over time.
Yep.
You know, we were building a passive level house a couple years ago, and I'll never forget. Like we had to detail all the plates, get caulked down to the subfloor as the walls were standing up, and I remember getting there and he stood a wall up and I was like, hey, there's no caulking under that. And he was like, shit. He's like, I forgot it on the last 2 walls. I'll rip the walls down. I'm like, no, guys. Like, we're not going backwards. We're not ripping wall. Like, it's best practice. Like, we that's not our main line of defense when it comes to air sealing. It's just, it's like, that's the detail because it's something that's easy to add and over time, you know, compounds. But it's the mindset of understanding that those little things, you know, compounded over, you know, the dozen or hundreds of decisions and things that you have to do in order to put a house together, you know, make a big difference. And Tyler, to your point, like, you know, we're going to make way more of an impact on home building if we focus on just like adding a handful of things to the guys that are right now doing nothing than trying to get more guys that are doing everything to do more homes.
What to play like a bit of devil's advocate, and maybe this conversation is coming from, we posted from Andersen, we posted or they posted a video where there's exterior insulation zip going on and then wooden window box, and people basically shitting a brick because you putting exterior insulation on, now you are having wooden window box which aren't creating the same thermal break, which is the point of the insulation in the first place. And you should be using a product like an insulated window box.
Sure.
And like, I get it, but at the same time, this is where I feel like people aren't really taking into account the big picture, where it's like, you still have a window there, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you want a cohesive plane of insulation across the entire outside of a house, you can't have windows and you can't have doors.
Yeah,
so
we
like,
can just put TV screens on the inside of the wall with nature pictures
right,
on them.
so
We'll
like,
be good to go.
At what point, as far as like, to pay for the manufacturing, all of the extra caulking, the tapes to integrate these things into, is it like the point of no return where you're actually consuming more resources to make that happen than you'll ever gain on the back end? And I think that sometimes people get like, is there any of that that's happening? Like, I think of it, the analogy I always have is like the diesel automotive industry, right? Diesel trucks were always preferred for heavy equipment because they're so efficient, and they pollute, right? So there's a lot of particulates. So now they put all of these emissions in place, which the longevity of them are not as good. So now they're not lasting as long. They get worse fuel mileage. So now you're consuming more natural resources, and then they break down all the time. So you're paying so it's like, is what we're putting in place actually making sense? Or are we consuming more natural resources on the back end to say that we're doing a good thing?
Yeah. I hear that completely. And the way I always think about it is it's you got to see the trees for the forest and the forest for the trees, right? So you will have increased impacts or inefficiencies along the way. So like, think about electrification, right? We're seeing that in the code. Everything's got to be electric ready. Things are moving towards electrification. Okay. Our electric grid still sucks.
Yep.
Right. But the point is, we're trying to get everything prepared now for a renewable energy powered grid that we are slowly building. And actually, it's on an exponential curve. It's just got a long way to go. So I think it's okay to have that added impact in the moment, because the longer term gain is there. So I think it's constantly sort of saying like, what's our impact now and what's our impact later, and then try to make a decision based on that. But I also think to a certain extent, like with the window buck example or other things like that, that may not be ideal. We just have to practice forgiveness. We have to both sort of have accountability and say, okay, we know that it's not the most perfect, best thing in the world. We're just going to be okay with it this time.
Yeah.
And we're going to try something on the next one. I think it's just got to be that ebb and flow as, a business moves through or a craftsperson moves through, a designer or whatever, to just try to, get a little bit better each time, because I think we'll move the whole thing further. It's sort of like slow is smooth and smooth is fast to a certain extent.
Yep. Yeah, it's probably a case of, you're not going to take 5 steps forward without taking a few back in between. I thought the window buck thing is funny, and even like looking into it more and understanding like, the thermal mass of wood and what that break provides by having a 7.5-inch piece of 2x material, and what like the insulation around the window can do. And at the end of the day, like the window to me would be the biggest thermal issue there.
Mm-hmm.
And like we're so concerned with this one aspect of it, where it's like, well, you could probably have a much bigger aspect by reducing the glazing.
Sure.
And to me, it was a funny argument, where it's like, sometimes I think that we're so honed in on certain things that we're not looking at the big picture.
Well, I mean, even our white oak project, we have downspouts in the exterior insulation detail. So we have
like hidden downspouts.
Yeah, hidden downspouts. So like we have our WRB, but then we have 5 inches of insulation, and within certain maybe like 8 locations, we have a 3-inch downspout in the insulation layer, and people are like, you're losing insulation value there. It's like,
that is a fact.
Yes. And they're like, that's the stupid detail. It's like the percentage of insulation value. No, I don't like, first off, we have 2 inches behind the pipe. So let's just start with that. But secondly, like the windows, the doors, the fact that it's like literally 1% of the overall envelope, like guys.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you experienced with the window buck, Tyler. It's like,
you
guys are so focused on the one thing that's wrong in that tiny microscope, and you're ignoring the fact that there's other things. Like you're never going to have a perfect assembly. It's a matter of like making.
You also have like 12-foot by 28-foot sliding glass doors in there.
Right. But it's like, but I think this goes back to the point you guys both made earlier. It's like, the point here is like, try to make things like whatever you can make better. Yeah. It's never going to be a perfect assembly. Like you can't, you will never accomplish that. It doesn't exist. You can certainly make improvements where you can. I could have left the cavity empty and just thrown a 3-inch pipe through it. I was like, hey, add 2 inches behind it. We have the room. Mm-hmm. And frankly, it's like, if you ran the actual data between the two examples, like we're talking, you could probably argue that the 2 inches is doing nothing, or you could argue that it's doing some, but it's like, it's so minor that, you're better off just approaching it with the mindset of like, where you can make better.
Right. Yeah.
John, from a sequencing perspective, not from tools, materials, stuff like that, but like from a home building process, being that you guys are working with so many designers and contractors, what does your process look like in an ideal scenario, as far as like when people are coming to you for help?
Yeah, I always say the earlier is the better. I mean, people kind of got to get the general schematics down. But I prefer working with something that I have a more editorial brain. Like if I had a choice, I would do renovation over new construction personally, because I like taking something that's already there and sort of messing with it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see something or some concepts, but on the earlier side, before things have gone so far that trying to move backwards means a whole bunch of changes in the plans or strategy or whatever. So I think it's in that phase of like, okay, we generally know what this house is going to be. We've got some assembly ideas. A lot of times people are coming to me at that stage because they're like, well, what assembly should I use? And I'm always like, what assembly do you want to use?
Yeah.
Right.
Let's talk about that, right? Like I got builders who like swear up and down double stud wall is the easiest, fastest, cheapest, most durable way to build a high performance wall. And then I got other people who are like, nope, that is stupid. It is exterior insulation all day long.
Mm-hmm.
They are both correct. Because it's about what you do and what your approach is and what you do well and what you know how to do. And that's what I'm always encouraging teams to do is just map reality first. What have you got? What are you working with? And the biggest thing that I always encourage everybody to do is build your team early.
Yeah.
Don't get a full set of like buildable plans and then go try to find someone to build them. I just don't think that that's going to give you the best experience and the best sort of like collaborative process to get there.
The what you said about wanting to have like a house in place and then renovate over build, I think is interesting. But as you say that, I realize that it's kind of a lot of the same. Like even as you build a house, like, all right, let's get schematics in place and then we're going to pull back and then we're going to change things. And then because like it's not actually built, where sometimes it does seem that renovation process, it's like, well, we already have the constraints in place. And while it may be more complicated to make all of these things work together, it's almost like, all right, well, now we have this like basis for the plan. And I think when you're building new, you are pulling back and you are backtracking and redoing things multiple times. And I think that's tough for people when you have to consistently keep paying for that and bringing the architect back and making revisions and addendums. But the processes are far more similar than they are actually different.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Do you feel that you guys have potential to continue to grow?
Yeah.
And is most of that due to like being an e-commerce company as far as your reach and how you can serve people?
I mean, I think that definitely gives us a platform that's just we can grow more. Like even the past year, like when I got hired a year ago, I was responsible for Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, right? And just in the past, and maybe 6-7 months later, we hired someone and split that region just because the demand was so high.
Yeah.
And it just feels like it continues to grow, and we're seeing that happen across the country, and and we're in Canada as well. So I don't see it slowing down at all. We're constantly having new people approach us. And again, I think one of the things that sets us apart in a lot of ways is, I mean, our products are top of the line products. They're really great. But I think our service is really good. And the fact that people feel like they have someone to get in touch with, I think that just is so invaluable in the market right now, because there's just a lack of that. People don't have consistent places to get their information and feel like they've got someone in their corner. And that's one of the things that we provide. And so I think, that model has a lot of growth potential in and of itself because people need it so much.
Are you having to travel for work?
Yeah, I travel. It sort of goes up and down, but I travel, throughout Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, probably once every couple of weeks at least, sometimes a couple of times in the same week. Coming up in the next couple of months, there's a series, I'm going to be at JLC, which obviously is right down the road for me, but then the NESE conference in Boston, which I encourage people to check out on the high performance building end of things. So I go to conferences and things like that. But I go, for site visits, for, I do lunch and learns that, for architecture firms primarily, but anybody who really wants it. And so it kind of just depends on the demand in a given week.
Is it mostly for sales or support or a combination of both?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably split kind of. I mean, I would say nothing I do is really salesy.
Yeah, but I mean, like, are you
It's
going and visiting people like, "Hey, we have this product that we carry that would be
no,
really great for," so then it's more
I
so
don't do that
support.
too
Okay.
much. I might do that more moving forward, maybe.
Yeah,
But so much of it is just based on demand right now
yeah.
and just serving the people who are already kind of like in the fold and wanting to do this
It's funny
stuff.
because I'm like, I'm thinking of it from a business perspective, like for 475, where it's like the support side of things typically is coming from the manufacturers, not the
Yeah.
vendor, you know? And like
Mm,
what you guys are doing is almost like on behalf of the manufacturers.
yeah.
Is that something that they compensate your company for? And I mean, it's just, you don't have to talk about this either if you don't, but I'm just like thinking from a structure perspective, like normally, hey, we have an issue with this product. All right, we'll send a rep out. Like my brother works for LP, and
Mm,
that's what he
yeah.
does, right? The support end of things. It's like, all right, somebody bought LP from this supplier, then they had an issue, and then my brother will go to the site to sort out the issue from LP rather than the supplier going and sorting out the issue. And like you, as the supplier or the vendor, are the one actually going out and either troubleshooting, detailing, whatever that may be. And how's that accounted for? Is that accounted for in the price, the business, are the
Mm.
manufacturers offsetting that? Just something that I was sitting here thinking about.
Yeah, to be quite frank with you, I don't know the exact detail, but
Mm-hmm.
essentially how it works in practice is that we're the exclusive distributor. That's our model, is exclusive distribution. So we essentially are the only, like, we're the
Yeah.
only person in North America
Yep.
who can answer questions about Proclima, right? The German company that we rep for tapes and membranes. But if some question comes across that we don't have the in-house expertise for, which it happens sometimes, but it's rare at this point.
Yeah.
We pretty much know it all. All the stuff that we're selling, the product lines that we have, we can go to them, and we got a good relationship there. And the only thing that we struggle with at all is just the time difference,
Yep.
right? There might be like a 24-hour lag
Yeah.
on getting a response, but they've got a technical team. And same thing with like our Brink system, which is our HRV ERV system from the Netherlands. Same kind of idea, right? And like most of these companies will send somebody over probably about once a year to come sort of hang out, bring new information forward, do some events and whatnot. And then we usually send a couple of our folks overseas every year or so to go do sort of trainings,
Yeah.
orientations, meet. So there's a good relationship back and forth there that we maintain. But we're sort of the face of all these brands, in the U.S. and Canada.
What is there anything that's kind of on your radar that's super exciting to you as far as high performance building and the building industry and changes that are taking place?
I honestly do think. I mean, back to what we were talking about earlier. I think the most exciting thing is the code changes
Yeah.
and actually seeing
I
the
never heard somebody
response.
say that before, ever.
I
Literally,
don't know.
probably the first and last person that's ever going to say that.
Well,
I'm
I think
excited for code changes.
I'm excited for it because I'm already seeing like where it's happening, where it's sort of jumping up really high, particularly in Massachusetts, the impact it's having and the positivity behind that. So like, there's always going to be struggles. People don't like change, right? For some reason, we're just terrified of change. But where we can embrace it and move it forward, it's good for everybody, right? And I mean, the nice thing about the codes, I think nobody ever talks about, is it theoretically creates a level playing field,
Yep.
right? It's rules that everybody got to follow. So from a competition standpoint, you're sort of competing on the same playing field as everybody else, and then it's just the knowledge gap or the practice gap on what it means to execute those things. But I mean, I think the biggest gap that's with the code changes is on the training and support side by states, municipalities, federal government. I think there needs to be more investment in training and education around these, not just what the code is, but how to meet it. And I think that's all over the place depending on where you are, not even just state to state, but town to town.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's a big gap there. Like, I'm a big fan of, I have a policy background. I like policy. I think it is super helpful in these, areas, but I think it needs to come hand in hand with a transition. support for change for those changes.
I mean, even from like an inspector basis as well, where like I'm sure that a lot of the stuff that you guys are dealing with and building, it's ahead of the curve, and inspectors just have no idea what they're looking at.
We just went through it. He showed up. We had an inspection last week and this week, and the inspector basically got on the job and was like, "Yeah, I mean, you're doing way above and beyond what is required. So how about you just walk me through it?"
Mm-hmm.
And then midway through, he's like, "Do you have an affidavit or something that like?"
I mean,
is someone
how are they protecting? Not, I mean, at the end of the day, how are they protecting themselves and absolving themselves from liability when they have no idea what they're looking at?
That's why they asked for the affidavit.
Yeah.
So like he was like, "Do you have an affidavit from the structural engineer?" And we're like, "Yeah." He goes, "Great, just send it to me. We're good." And then yesterday it was, he's like, "Can you just walk me through like what product you're using on the exterior installation and like how this works and where's your internal vapor retarder?" And I'm like, "This is why we don't need it here." Blah blah blah. And he's like, "Okay, yeah. I mean," and he
Can't
looked.
wrap your head around
He
that.
goes. He just looked at me. He goes, "Huh? Keep trucking."
Yep.
and left.
That was my experience building because we were always so far beyond code.
Yeah.
And we would. I think the other thing too that we would do is we would sort of bend over backwards for everybody involved in the project, and we became known, I think, amongst like contractors, on the utility, plumbing, HVAC, electrical, like they loved coming to our job site because they knew they'd be well taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And the code inspectors that I've dealt with, are like, "Everything looks great, guys." And we're like, "Well, are you sure? Like, we've left this open for you so you could see it." They're like, "No, it's fine." And I think there's a sense that like, if you're taking it to the nines like that, then the hope is you're doing that everywhere. You're doing it structurally as well. And, you're doing all these things and you're crossing all your J's. So, I mean, I think that that rapport is really critical in
Hold
the
on
process.
a second. I'm not even going to, you can't just breeze through that. Crossing your J's.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a cross.
I know, but like it's dotting the I's, crossing the T's.
His name's John.
Between that and you're hiding the liver and the mashed potatoes.
That one I like.
Are two references that I don't think I could ever use.
There you go.
You're
welcome. Take them forward.
I might try it. See how it works out.
When I was little, we had like our table that there was 7 of us, but the table we ate at, there was this bay window behind us, and my parents had plants on that. And I remember my mom made flounder once, and I didn't want to eat it, and I stuck it in the plant. So maybe it's like hiding the flounder in the plants.
Wow.
I like the liver and the mashed potatoes.
What'd you end up doing?
Hiding the flounder in the flowers.
Yes, exactly.
Gotta have the alliteration.
I mean, I don't think it stuck for that long because I would assume it probably started to stink more than it already did.
So, like, I mean, someone else dealt with it and never.
I mean, they were just like potted plants behind the table. My mom probably found it the next day, but I just was like shoving it into the potted plants because I wasn't eating that.
I remember I used to get up to go to the bathroom, and be like, "Oh, I have to pee so bad," and I just fill my mouth with all the food, and I'd go spit it in the toilet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
My kids just don't eat it and then tell me to make them something else. And I'm like, don't
talk
to me that way. And then I'm like, I end up
How many chicken nuggets you want?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. No, we had to sit there. I mean, there's only 2 of us, my brother and I, and then our parents. And like, it was like you had to sit there until you had that we called it the no thank you serving. Like that, that's how my parents did. They're like, you got to have some. You got to try at least a little bit. You don't have to eat the whole thing, but you got to eat some of it. And I have a reputation for being stubborn, and I definitely logged some time at the table there.
Mm-hmm.
But they watched us like hawks. We wouldn't have been able to get away with that, I don't think.
Yeah. Do you guys own in Rhode Island?
No, actually, this is my home office, and my wife and I rent an apartment in like an old cotton mill.
Nice.
So it's one of these loft apartments, which it's the the son of the cobbler without shoes. It's horribly inefficient.
That's where I was getting to. It's like being that you have like this is, what makes you tick, and this is your upbringing, this is your career, and obviously there's a lot behind that. What is it like living in a house that is not up to par?
It's more frustrating for me than it is for my wife because she just likes the big windows and some exposed brick, and it's really nice from
Yeah,
all those
it's just
perspectives.
cute.
But like,
It's
it
just cute.
drives me crazy. I mean, I have 10-foot windows here that are poorly air sealed. The ventilation is terrible. There is some insulation. They did insulate the inside of the masonry in a lot of places, so there's some of that. But like, we have 13-foot ceilings,
Hmm.
which I will say the one thing that is amazing about this place is we have a 12-foot Christmas tree every year,
Yeah, that's sick.
and we're on the second floor, which means
You get to
I
throw
have
it
to
out the window.
haul it up this. I have to haul it up the stairs. No, when it's time for it to go, which we still have it up, we're those people. We
So
hold
it's a
on to
fire
it
hazard right now.
just till the bitter end. Yeah. I'll actually go and trim everything and put it in a tarp and carry it out in a bundle and take it to my brother-in-law's house where we set it on fire.
Do you ever anticipate building something for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly vacillate because as much as into construction and everything as I am, we bought a house in Maine, and I did some renovations on it. We lived there for about 4 years, and a lot of things were great. But to be honest with you, I don't like spending my time on my own place.
Yeah,
I
I I,
just
I can relate.
I'd just rather do other things. Like even when it comes to mowing the lawn and stuff, it's just like I just am frustrated the whole time because I'm like, I don't want to be doing this.
Yeah,
So I kind of like the renting thing because I don't have to do much. I do like little repairs around here because it's not worth calling maintenance for them. But I mean, it's funny that way. But I would love to have like a straw panel house that
yeah,
was super high performance, passive house level. Like that'd be amazing. I'd love that. But it's about, do I want to invest the time and energy and everything into that when I'd rather sort of like, put my time and energy into other things. So
yeah. I think a lot of time it also comes down to like the conversation that you were saying earlier, where it winds up being about your impact and your outreach, and if you're consuming all of your own personal resources to build a house for you to experience at the end of
yeah,
the day, like, can you have a bigger overall worldly or
right.
lifestyle type impact just
Yeah.
doing what you're doing on a daily basis? And I think that's a very strong perspective, which I've realized myself, where it's like, although I may enjoy what I do and I'm talented with what I do, I think that if I want to actually impact people, it can't just be me doing this in my own little world for one customer at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the reach that you have here and just constantly putting, whatever you're learning out there. I mean, I think that's a huge part of it as well. We need a community of knowledge around all this stuff, and we got to keep talking about it and whatnot. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I think like one of the things that I'm involved in Rhode Island is I'm on the board of Passive House Rhode Island. There's a small group of us that started that. And it's, we're Passive House Rhode Island, but we're actually really sort of like focused on just delivering good building science and good
Hmm.
high performance, like details and conversation. Mostly we've done like BS and beer events. And it's been amazing just to see the appetite. People show up. We'll get sometimes like 30 people to come out. I went and looked at a job the other day where the guy came in. He just asked all these super basic, but like to the point questions. And he's like, all right, now I want you guys over at my project. And he's just like turning on a dime because now he has like a place to get that information. He has some experts. And so now he's going to move forward with it. And so, I mean, to me, that's like the kind of impact that I really like having is, creating these community spaces where people can feel comfortable asking the questions and then, working with the ideas.
Yeah. It's neat to hear what you have to say and some perspective on things. And I do like to reiterate what you said earlier about like do one thing better than your last project, or implement something else into your system, because looking to go from ground zero to passive house may be extremely overwhelming for you, but that's not the natural progression, right? You have to build upon, just like you're learning to walk before you can run. And I think that, even myself looking at a project comes up and it's like, well, they want to implement this, and the detailing although it may be simple, just seems so overwhelming because it's different than what you've done
Yeah.
before, and you don't want to make a mistake. But I think that if you can just continue to better yourself one project at a time, one detail at a time, you'll end up retaining all of that. And I think
Yeah.
it opens doors to just building a much better project, even if it,
Yeah.
it may not be at the top, it's not going to be at the bottom, and just continue to work your way up. And I think that also allows you to build those efficiencies, like you said, with the habitat example, where it's like, yeah, anyone who's listening to this, buy house number 6 or 7. Don't buy 1 or 2.
Yeah.
um,
I think it's about constantly keeping your aspirations high, but not like beating yourself up if you're not hitting everything all at once.
yeah, it's about progress more so than perfection.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool, man. We appreciate it. Anything coming up with 475 or career wise that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of things coming up in the next few. This year is starting off kind of busy, but I'm going to be doing a presentation for actually Build Green Connecticut. But it's an online webinar, so it's open for. So if anybody wants to go to Build Green Connecticut, you can sign up for it there. I'm going to be doing a presentation on this kind of stuff, so that's kind of exciting. I'm going to be presenting at BS and Beer Boston coming up in a couple of weeks.
Nice.
So I'm pretty excited about that, and there's the Studio for High Performance Design and Construction that I just want to shout out because they're starting up in Newton, and they've gotten some funding to just create a really great training program so that carpenters who are just getting into this, or building owners, can just learn all these basic skills. And they're going to have. So do you know Auburndale Builders?
Yeah.
Nick Falkoff, yeah. So it's a project that he started, but now they hired an executive director. So it's sort of based out of his office area. They have like a section of that building.
That's cool.
But they're actually doing a massive barn renovation to create a big studio space where they can have big mock-ups, all different assemblies, and actually run people through all these things and create modules so that people can sort of incrementally build their skills while they're still out there working. So it's more approachable.
Tyler, we should get Nick on. He's a local builder, and I know he prioritizes that building science first mentality. So that's super cool. I didn't know he was doing that.
Is all of this stuff as like John Dean's your own personal accord, or is this stuff through work?
So this is all pretty much through work. That's part of our outreach and education sort of focus. So I get to do these things, which is cool. And then I end up getting, invited to be a part of stuff. And so it's just, work affords me the ability to kind of participate in these ways.
I mean, cool. It's a really cool dynamic and situation that they're creating with that model. And it's so logical and it makes so much sense, but it's so different than the way that everyone else does things now from top to bottom. But even I don't know, giving you the autonomy to go and do this stuff on your own and not necessarily pitch it as you're doing it for them, but to create and grow your network while working for them and getting paid for them, and really explore and dive into things that are really important to you in life, I think is super cool. And I think at the end of the day, that's just going to bode well for their business as well.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's really cool about it is we don't have massive marketing budgets for this.
Yeah.
But where we do have it, it's basically most of the stuff that we use with it is either increased educational material. So it might be like producing a video or something like that, or just putting the time in on the blogs and the website, or it's reinvestment into the industry. So we sponsor a lot of passive house organizations and all of that. And so obviously it gets our brand out there, but it's also about taking our success to try to grow the industry, in the directions we think it should be moving to, which is also just really cool. And part of that, sometimes that donation is my time, right? Just to let me go do it. So.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys.
So you have to get us the information on what you're doing. You said Bill Green, Connecticut, and then BS and Beer Boston.
Yeah.
So get us all that information, and we can help spread the word on that as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
And then we'll be at JLC, so we can come say hi.
Yeah, we'll have a booth there this year, which I'm pretty excited about.
That's
We're gonna
awesome.
have some cool stuff on display, and also encourage people to check out the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association NESE conference in Boston.
And it's literally down the street from my office. I have not been to that one, so.
Oh, come on, you gotta. Yeah,
I know.
I'm on the content committee this year. It's gonna be good.
All right, let's do something.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We'll talk offline.
All right, thanks, guys.
Great, man, appreciate it.
John, thanks so much, man.
Good thank you.
Dude, I love listening to people talk about this because I think there's so much in this space that I think so many people are afraid of, and they turn a blind eye and then they just keep doing the same thing that they're doing. And, code gets more stringent. They implement some best, quote unquote, best practices, and then their homes fail and they have all these issues. And then they turn to saying that's because homes are more complicated, blah, 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 blah. But the best piece of advice out of all of what we talked about was the fact that just do one better thing.
Yep.
And just get incrementally better over time. Like the analogy of going to the gym, it's like, yeah, that's exactly it. Like, you don't see immediate results, but over time you will. And, and if you're not sure, at least show up to the gym and get in the habit of doing it. I think that's, yeah, it
could be very overwhelming looking to break into this market or begin to adopt some of these high performance building techniques. But, you have to step back and realize that you don't have to go from building a typical home to a passive style house. Like, you can begin to implement these details and build on these details, and work on just bettering your process. And I think that that's probably the way to go, because the mistakes don't cost you as much money. There's not as much risk and exposure, and you can learn at just a more regulated pace. So yeah, definitely one project at a time, one technique at a time. Just continue to make a better product and a better system.
Love that. Guys, as always, check us out, moderncraftsman.co. That's .co. We have some freebies up there for free downloads in the extras tab. You can also check out all of the stuff that we've been promoting, from pre-construction to lead generation. All of that's available on the website. And if you're just interested in staying up to speed with what we got going on, make sure you fill out the newsletter. We send a weekly newsletter every single week with the episodes, some bonus extras in that email. And then in between that, we're always engaging with our audience. So if you want to be part of that, make sure you get on the list and join the others that are already there.